At one point in our discussion, I say, who's been sent a nude or who's sent a nude, and everybody's hand went up.
You described pornography as the new sex ed. I'd love all three of you to talk about this a bit, about how you think social media is changing the dynamic between the sexes, because that is one thing, the availability and proliferation of porn, which has been around since the beginning of time, but it's different now, and it is. And I can tell you from having sons, they talk about it. Lauren, why don't you start?
Girls learn at an early age that showing their body and their sexuality is a way to get approval. And then the other thing I saw was just about, kids being exposed to pornography super early, like 3rd grade. Basically, once they get that phone or once they have a friend who has a phone, it's that gateway. And what they see there is super disturbing, like way beyond, maybe like your grandfather's girly magazine or whatever people saw before, that there's violence against women. BDSM was a popular trend, which I confirmed, like even asking my own children if they were familiar with that. Even the young people in my office were familiar with that. Choking was a trend. One girl jokingly says, I actually like BDSM, but it's kind of scary because teenagers don't know how to choke properly. So these are like very common, things that pornography is the new sex ed. And I think that leads to a lot of performative kind of qualities on the part of girls, a lot of boys not knowing if they measure up. And again, like comparing against a totally unrealistic standard.
A girl sent a picture like that to one of my sons. I'm going to say which one. And I have to tell you, he was so confused and upset as a boy, right? Because, of course, you'd be like, oh, girl looking sexy kind of thing. But he didn't quite know. He was not at an age to know what to do with it. And it presented a real problem for me to talk to him about it.
Coincidentally, I did a story for the Times last year that was awfully well read called It's Time to Talk to Our Kids About Pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And what they're getting at is that we may have to think about what is known as a harm reduction strategy in the era we live in. It used to be, let's say that your kiddo got a magazine with some pictures in it. It didn't come across as instructional. It wasn't nearly so explicit. But to Lauren's point, once somebody gets a phone, young people are beginning to see this.
Right.
And it may be that the antidote is what is called porn literacy. It's a really hard and difficult idea to get your head around as a parent, but it goes to directly what you were confronted with. Do we have to tell our kids, this stuff's out there, you're likely to see it, it is very misleading, it is not a user's manual, please talk to me or look up the fact that this is gravely misrepresentative, because it's going to be pretty hard to keep them from seeing it altogether.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that we just talked about last night was my kids were looking at the kids were 7 or 8 and they seemed to have a phone. I don't know how. And we were like, we have to start talking to our 5-year-old about what she might see on someone else's phone. And so you might see things that we didn't know it was on there. We didn't know if it was Paw Patrol or something worse. Race and racism is another issue. Gender is one issue. Matt, you write about peer pressure on a global scale for teens in Africa who are comparing themselves to Americans and Europeans. Lauren, the kids of color in social studies, talk about social media favoring white, wealthy kids in the same way it leans into sex and how it impacts them. And Jack, you said on Adolescence, its focus is on masculinity, not race. And right-wing critics have called it anti-white propaganda. Elon Musk amplified that on Twitter. I'd like each of you to talk about it.
Everyone is your neighborhood now. And I think once you compared yourself to everybody in middle school, and now it's possible to compare yourself well beyond that. Again, there are pros and cons to this. You can also communicate with people when you feel alienated. I think peer pressure is amplified tremendously, but I do not know that we can say that it is directly responsible for mental health challenges more than it was in the past. And I think to some extent you can see it through the same lens that you look at the way people used to look at America through movies and say, that's what I want to be like. To some extent, it's really served a corporate function because it's created such uniformity around tastes.
That they can then exploit that. Lauren, what about the idea of social media favoring white, wealthy kids in the same way and how it impacts them? Did you anticipate that?
No, I mean, I've looked at girls and body standards and beauty standards for a long time. And what I saw was that the comparison was just making everything worse, and that a lot of the kids of color talked about the Caucasian beauty standard and how and it's so quantifiable now because of your likes that, kids who are black and brown were trying to make themselves more Caucasian-like to get likes, whether that was having less body hair or lightening skin. And there was a very real sense that a lot of the kids agreed about was that this kind of white beauty standard was the most popular. I think the other thing that's kind of new, though, is instead of it getting better for girls, it's gotten worse for boys. And boys talked a lot about, the beauty standard, the racial one, but also the body one, the needing to have muscles.
Mhm.
There's I've been looking at a lot of social about enhancements
Oh.
and steroids. But yeah, I think it's very real. And I think it even came out in like the TikTok research by the 14 attorney generals that they, like TikTok itself knew that more beautiful images were being favored. So I think it's pretty intentional.
Jack, you talk about this idea of anti-white propaganda, your show, which it's absurd to me, but I'd love you to address it.
What happened was the show started to be more talked about, and then there was a movement against us. I don't know whether it was in any way constructed or whether it just happened organically. And the movement against us was that we had basically told the story of a specific case and then race swapped the character. And there was no discernible details from that case that seemed like we'd copied. It's just that once someone said it, then suddenly everyone was saying it, and it went all over the internet. What concerned me was not Musk amplifying it, because I wasn't so surprised by that, but I was surprised by Kemi Badenoch, who's the leader of the opposition, saying that we'd done that. It wasn't, oh God, the right wing have taken over, or it was what's happening to our news in this country, that someone's consuming something as truth because they've been told it on social media, and when the person that's consuming it is the leader of the opposition, that's surely really, really concerning.
Jack, could I
Sure, go
can I
ahead.
just jump in on that?
Sure.
I think to my mind, you've hit arguably the or one of the most profound points is the information is so unreliable that it is leaving our young people not only overwhelmed, but really uncertain about what to trust and believe. And I guess my larger concern is, even if we were to remove the smartphone for a few years, and I am an advocate for that, but even if we do for a few years, they will matriculate and graduate into a world that is filled with lies. And so I think that's why where you see me going is not disagreeing with you guys that the smartphone is an issue. It is. I don't know how closely it's directly responsible for mental health, but I think we have to think bigger. We are raising kids in a very, very chaotic world. And how are we going to help them understand the information when so much of it is untrue?
I totally agree with you. I mean, one of the things we did with the show was make an educational curriculum. And I think media literacy is the absolute most important thing, because it's also affecting all of our civic discourse and, of course,
Yes.
adults.
And adults, that's the problem. Adults are addicted.